You're listening to Don't Waste Water.
Found a team. What's your secret sauce that no one else, or it would be very difficult for someone to replicate? And, Michelle and I kind of looked at each other, and there's myself and just as a rough number, sub 5,000 people globally that know what they're looking at when they're looking at the inside of a sewer pipe.
Hello, bonjour, and welcome to the Don't Waste Water podcast.
If you watch it, I'm not going to believe you, or if I watch it, you're not going to believe me, so we'll watch it twice, which is insane.
I'm your host, Antoine Walter, and in today's episode, I'm delighted to welcome Amanda Sikora as my guest.
It's a lot of money to put a camera in a pipe. So if you're going to spend the money to put the camera in the pipe, you want that data to be high quality, you want it to be objective and very, very accurate.
Amanda is the CEO and co-founder of VAPAR.
Even though we strongly advocate the use of AI, the way that we talk about our tool is it's like an assistant. To borrow the Microsoft term of Copilot, it's like an assistant. It's an extension of your team. It's like a grad or an intern in your team. So you let them help you, or certainly they can be helpful, but you wouldn't leave them unsupervised.
VAPAR helps water utilities prioritize their spending, prevent pipe failures, and make better decisions with an AI-powered cloud solution. Nowadays, everybody's an expert in combined sewer challenges. I mean, it's never had as much mainstream exposure as it did over the past few years, and I'm recording this intro while the Paris Olympic triathletes run the biggest race of their life, which got enabled by intensive works on that said sewer that finally made the Seine River swimmable just days before the event. And before that, we had the UK scandals around combined sewer overflows and the over £150 million of fines that the British water utilities collected for their shortcomings in protecting the receiving water bodies. All in all, people start to realize that there might be something about these poo carrier lines that they should care about. That's a start. But beyond the fines and the potentially sick Olympic swimmers, the consequences of a failing sewer and stormwater infrastructure are probably less known. Structural damages, collapses, breaks, public health risks, safety risks, or environmental pollution are just some of the not-so-welcome side effects of a deteriorating pipe system. So to prevent that, utilities have to use their limited money and workforce wisely to always aim for the best bang for their buck. To do so, they've leveraged improvements in camera technology since the 90s to inspect their pipelines and only decide once they've seen footage of the invisible what they shall do about that network. Now sure, having footage is better than being blind, but it still requires a human to look at hours and hours of sewer videos, which, let's face it, is not Game of Thrones level of storytelling, and manually code what to see in each frame. That's cumbersome, time-consuming, boring, and, well, subjective. And that is where AI, and more precisely machine learning, has an edge over the human eye and brain. It never gets tired and will always quantify stuff the same way. To that extent, and as Amanda will explain in a minute, AI is enhancing the human and assisting the decision-making process. It's really not about replacing but enabling and truly do more with less. Today, we'll explore Amanda's and her co-founder Michele Aguilar's journey from an engineering internship spent watching sewer footage to building an exciting business leveraging the AI revolution. How does deep learning revolutionize the way utilities manage their assets, and how does VAPAR apply it to assess defects in pipes and create suggestions? What are the economic benefits of VAPAR's approach, and how does the company convince utilities to adopt them? What are Amanda, Michele and their team building? Let's answer all of that and more right after I remind you that if you like what you hear, please take this episode and share it with a colleague, a friend, your boss or your team, and I'll meet you on the other side. Hi Amanda, welcome to the show.
Hey Antoine, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
It's been a while. I had an Australian series at some point with a lot of guests from down under, and it's always a pleasure to think that, we have all those thousands of kilometers who set us apart. And on your website, actually, there's a big number featuring those millions of kilometers, because you're saying that you're helping 6 million feet of pipes to be managed. And I'm just wondering, what is the status quo you're replacing? How would their life be if VAPAR wasn't to exist?
We're expanding our footprint, which we're very excited about. So last year we did over 6 million feet of inspection footage and helped with the investment planning of that without VAPAR, that whole process would have been painfully manual. People would have had to, much like myself when I was an engineering intern, now many years ago, watching 8 hours a day of footage and just writing down whenever I saw anything weird, inspection footage of an underground pipe. All of that process is now completely automated in our platform using deep learning to identify defects and things like that. So it turns a process that could be weeks, sometimes months with some of our clients into a couple of minutes. Very customizable, very easy for them to come to a decision as to where they spend their money.
So that's footage of wastewater and stormwater lines.
Yes, exactly. So they'll put cameras inside sewer pipes and stormwater pipes just to try and find out, is there any blockages? Are there any breaks? Trying to get in ahead of the problem so that people don't just fall into a sinkhole or have sewage come up in their basement. So they'll try and put these cameras in and try and find the issues. But all of that footage, every foot, every meter has to be watched manually, very often more than once. So because the process is manual, it's error prone. If you watch it, I'm not going to believe you. Or if I watch it, you're not going to believe me. So we'll watch it twice, which is insane, given that over 1 billion meters is inspected every year.
We'll go into who's your customer, what's their life, how they integrate with what you do and what you exactly do. But before that, if I try to boil it down to what's their unique value they're getting from you, because I could see it as a time saver, as a money saver, on the long run, on the short run. What is like this absolute spice where they realize that with VAPAR, there's this?
Basically, our whole company and all our product is focused at doing is fixing pipes before they fail. So most of the world runs their pipe inspection and management process reactively, unfortunately. They'll wait until a customer rings up and tell them that there's something in their front yard or in their basement, and then they'll put a camera in. With our product, we're basically helping them use that data to try and run a more proactive program by helping them say, well, this is the condition of your asset. These are the highest risk assets. You should go target investment here. And then next time, you either don't or do need to come back to this spot.
But how bad is it if it breaks? Because on the water line, I get it. It breaks, you have a main damage, probably the roads gets damaged. I saw some statistics from Canada a while ago, but they should pertain true, which is about count 1 million of impact for one break on the main water line. But you are on the sewer side and on the stormwater side. So is it similar impacts we're discussing here, or what's the harm?
The gravity networks like a stormwater and sewer are sometimes thought of as the poor cousins of drinking water. They fall under gravity. They're not pressurized like drinking water, and the consequence of failure is slightly different. Some might say a little bit lower because it's not related to a human right, the way that drinking water is. But the consequence of failure sometimes can be catastrophic, especially when you get your large trunk mains. The condition of that is super important. If they fail, you could get large sinkholes. So there are many instances across the world where sinkholes form and people unfortunately drive into them or things like, consume houses even. But there's also the environmental impact of that. So not even, human health and public health reasons, but even just environmental impact of sewage in the waterways. You only have to do a quick Google of the UK public media at the moment to see how that's being reflected and played out at the moment.
Just before we go into the deep dive, I have a sanity check to do, which is you're making CCTV inspection better because you're removing the human aspect of it, like the human subjectivity. It becomes objective parameters checked by AI. I get that. My sanity check is on the part of how many of the thousands of kilometers of stormwater and sewer are already inspected with CCTV. Because if you're making CCTV better, but CCTV is like really a small portion of the inspection, then you're making a portion of the portion better. So what's the status quo?
Like I mentioned before, over 1 billion meters of pipe is inspected every year. And that's roughly 10% of the global network. But the thing is that global network is inspected every year. So that 1 billion meters is recycled every year. The attempt of most water utilities, and certainly the ambition of most water utilities, is to try and see if they can inspect their entire network at a 1 to 10 frequency. So they get around to the same pipe every 10 years. Most water utilities are not anywhere close to that. Some are between, 1 and 20 years, like we see in the US. In other markets, such as Australia and New Zealand and even the UK, it can go out to every 50 years, once every 80 years. But crucially, they'll keep inspecting their network until they reach that frequency. So even though it's a discrete amount every year, they'll do the same and try and get that number up as much as they can to bring that frequency down.
Let me try to see if I get that one. So there are about 10 billion meters of pipes which could be inspected, out of which every year 1 billion gets inspected. You're inspecting 2,000 kilometers, so 0.2% of the amount which is CCTV inspected. And the added value is that today they might just inspect and see things which maybe evolve, so they need to do it every year and stuff like that, where you say, I'm assessing, and then you're good to go for a longer period of time. Do I get that one right?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And there's huge upside. So like you say, VAPAR's adoption is a small percentage of the global inspection market. So there's huge upside on what we do, but also it's a lot of money to put a camera in a pipe. So if you're going to spend the money to put the camera in the pipe, you want that data to be high quality. You want it to be objective and very, very accurate. So that's what we help with as well.
Interesting. It's a lot of money to put a camera in a pipe. How much additional costs would it be to run your inspection on top? If you take a percentage, like it's 100 points, put that camera in the pipe, how many points would it be for you to inspect on top of that?
We're sub 10% of the meter per meter cost of putting a camera in the pipe, but that's not actually where our business case for our software is actually made. Business case for our software is what happens after the camera comes out of that pipe. So someone's going to make a decision as to whether I need to do anything or there's any activities that need to be scheduled. And that can be 3 to 8 times more expensive, that activity. And so that's the decision that needs to have a little bit more governance over it based on the data that's collected.
I get that it's not the business case, and we'll discuss the business case, but I'm just trying to get a muggle understanding of all of that, because if I take a reference of when you're welding pipes, for instance, you have some norms which tell you should do destructive testing, and then destructive testing is super expensive because you need to cut your pipe, cut it out, see if the weld was right or not, and stuff like that, which means you have 100% more cost when you're doing that additional layer compared to if you did nothing. Whereas here, if I get you right, you have less than 10% additional costs to run VAPAR on top of what you're already doing, which might make you think, okay, it's not that much more, probably worth the effort. But we'll go into that. Before we go into the absolute details, I'd like to get your story right. And you have a slightly different story on your website from what I read from press articles, because you are 2 co-founders with Michele Aguilar, who's your co-founder. And
Yes, yeah.
your website says 2 Australian engineers on a mission, whereas what I read in the press is that you're also high school friends, which is not mutually exclusive. But what's the story?
Michele and I went to uni together. So I did civil environmental engineering and Michele did mechatronics engineering. So all things machine learning. So known each other from uni. We also went to high school, you're right. We went to Western Sydney High School together. So we've known each other before we started VAPAR for 15 years and then much longer now since we've started VAPAR together.
You know each other and you go on to do your own engineering studies. And within those studies, you end up having to inspect pipes and you find out it's cumbersome. And then you decide to do something about it. Sounds like the perfect Silicon Valley story, but there's always more nitty-gritty details to it. So what's the full story?
Yeah, so I was working at Sydney Water as an intern, 8 hours a day, just watching sewer footage. But that was in 2009 when I was an intern. And then VAPAR only started in 2017, 2018. Michele herself actually had a bit of wastewater experience as well. She worked on the process automation controls for Bondi wastewater treatment plant. So famous beach, Bondi, the wastewater treatment plant controls on that. So she had a little bit of experience with not only Sydney Water, but with the wastewater side of things. And then her and I have always been tossing ideas back and forth with each other. So when deep learning, a lot of the open source frameworks were coming out in 2017, and there were starting to be not only the frameworks itself, but the forums were guiding people on how to use these open source frameworks. And people like Michele and I could just jump on the forums and learn really quickly how to use these frameworks and customize them to our very specific needs. Not everyone knows what they're looking at when they're looking at sewer pipe inspection footage. So at that time, it was a really nascent spot in the deep learning field. So yeah, we were able to capitalize on it really early.
You say forums. Did you teach yourself deep learning on Reddit, or what's the story?
Oh, you'd be surprised. Well, I mean, at that time, the forums was one of the only ways. I mean, short of that, you had to kind of be a PhD in computer science to be able to replicate what Google was just giving you for free.
But still, there's a word between we always wanted to do something together. We noticed that field was maybe under-researched, underserved, and we create a company and we take the word. So what's the turning point? When do you say, oh, we need to create that thing and that thing has to be VAPAR and it's going to be that? Was it really what we see today of VAPAR, or did you do some pivots along the way? What was the first iteration?
Yeah, so the first iteration of VAPAR was really, again, capitalizing on that deep learning object detection kind of movement that was really early in 2017. And it was basically AI for anything. So it was, counting people, counting cars, counting traffic lights, counting possums. There was lots of kind of use cases that we were exploring and trying to test, will people pay us for this sort of data? And I'm going to say it was a book by Peter Thiel, 0 to 1, that I read. And there was a whole bunch of criteria that he was kind of, he puts out there to say what makes a good startup, and especially in that kind of early phase. And one of the things that I think really crystallized the VAPAR that we know today is, what is something that you as a founder, team, what's your secret sauce that like no one else, or it would be very difficult for someone to replicate? And, Michelle and I kind of looked at each other, and there's myself and, just as a rough number, some 5,000 people globally that know what they're looking at when they're looking at the inside of a sewer pipe. I hope that number will change, but at the moment, very few people know what they're looking at. And so if Google wanted to try and replicate this, it would be very difficult. Now, maybe not the case, but when we were starting, there was much more interesting things that Google were applying their algorithms to. We were like, this is a small space. We're probably protected for now. And so we decided to start there. And lo and behold, people started paying us for it. And certainly we built it out from there.
That's super interesting. And I'll continue with that one. But just, sorry, I'm slowing you down. But it makes me think, of when ChatGPT 3, 3.5, 4 came out, you had a lot of entrepreneurs coming out and saying, hey, I can now do that with ChatGPT, which I could not do before. I'm putting the brackets around entrepreneur because a lot of that was like really when the new ChatGPT was out, their business model was dead. What you're saying is that was the mass market reaction to AI becoming main stage. You were an early adopter in the crew of people who in the 2017s saw those algorithms starting to be public and to be in the open space with those forums. And then you're thinking, okay, within those early adopters, what is special about us? We understand the shitty side of the story, so let's go there. But still, you had to have some merit to be within those early adopters, which makes me think you were on a chase to create something. Am I right with that?
Yes. Yeah, definitely. I think even me personally really fell in love with the idea of starting a business, starting something. I did engineering, thought that I needed to get an MBA. So I spent about a year trying to get into an MBA. And another engineering colleague of mine who had started his own business, he was, you just got to start. There's no MBA in the world that's going to teach you anything. You won't learn quicker if you just do it yourself.
You mentioned that not long after you had created your first MVP, some money started flowing. So what's your first customer? What's the story?
Yeah, so our first customer was a council in Sydney, Australia. They had a huge amount of inspection footage, 5,000 videos, in fact, that they had never got coded, but they wanted to be able to pull into their system and start making investment decisions on. And it was kind of like this serendipitous moment where we were like, well, we need footage to train our algorithm. And so Michele built this very early stage of our product where we actually went through and manually coded the footage for them. So it was more of a professional services arrangement. It wasn't even a product really at that point. By delivering that project, we were developing that data set as I went. So yeah, it was a very interesting project. We spoke openly about the AI ambition with them, and that won them over because, they could have got that done by anybody, but they wanted to get us involved, and we were very excited about being involved because they saw the vision to say, this is ridiculous that we're getting people to do this. Like, if you can find a solution, go for it.
So the first AI was you.
Yeah, well, you've got to start somewhere, but now there's a lot more to the process.
Do you find them? Do they find you? What's the way?
Certainly at that stage, it was just, I had worked in the industry. Michele as well had worked in the industry. It was really just networks. So people that we knew, contacts that we knew, that sort of stuff. I mean, even now, it's a lot about warm introductions and referrals, clients speaking to clients. So that's never really gone away. I think the water industry, as you know, is very small, but tight-knit. So yeah, that's been helpful.
When you're looking at those footage images, what are you looking for? Are you looking for to say, that's a root, that's a crack, that's whatever could be like a fat burger, I don't know, what could all be in those pipes? Or are you also straight from the beginning assessing that and saying, yeah, that's a root, you're right. But given how the root is placed, and don't touch it for the next 10 years.
It's a bit of an iterative process. Each region that we're in, so we're in Australia, New Zealand, US, and the UK, there is a reporting standard for each of these. So if you're doing pipe coating, there's a standard against which you need to do that. And there's on average, roughly around 200 particular defects that a reporter could report on. And so our product or even a manual process would be going through and looking at the footage and saying, okay, if I see something that's interesting, does it classify against any of these 200 defects that are in the standard? So that process happens first and objectively and rightly so. The layering of this condition assessment or risk assessment generally happens after to say, okay, well, I found all these defects. Maybe these ones I care about, these ones I don't. The severity is also taken into account, things like that, to make sure that you've got all the granularity and you've got all the information so that, if you inspect it in 10 years again, you can see the potential depreciation of the pipe. But that decision making in that point of time generally is separate from the actual defect identification itself.
As a rule of thumb, AI detects more defects than the human eye or less defect than human eye, or exactly the same number?
More, actually. And we found that phenomena that the AI detects more because there's not as much fatigue associated with identifying like fine roots at every joint. You need to report on any root intrusion in clay pipes. There's a joint every 2 meters. And so that can be cumbersome. And if you're an operator, you have to like basically pause and write physically fine roots into the inspection software. So AI picks up more. But when it comes to severity, operators basically, it's par for par if it's high severity. So that they're very unlikely to miss. A human operator would very unlikely to miss things like collapses or big holes in the pipe, as same with AI.
But the fact that it detects more is what I was expecting. And where my question is leading to is, can it be scary for the utility to suddenly see that there are much more defects than what they thought because you're detecting more? And hence they might be overreacting, whereas what you're detecting is something which is of a low severity, which is good to know, but also is proof that after all, the network is safe.
Yes, it can be very scary. And a lot of utilities for that reason kind of don't like the granularity that the data that the AI can give you, which is totally understandable because as soon as you write these things down, government organizations, as soon as you write these things down, then they have to act on it. But the way that we work with our clients is to say, hey, this is the data, this is what it says, but your risk assessment and your asset management policy can dictate something different. So just because you have all of these defects in the network, we can have a look at them, apply a certain risk score to each of these defects and say, this is something that is going to impact in this financial year or this planning period or not. And we can start to calibrate how the treatment is applied so that their long-term financial planning is not completely blown out of the park just because they found like 15 cracks that they didn't ever see before.
And do they trust you?
So that's a good question. We've shown in our data that our AI has been able to pick up 90% of the defects in people's inspection footage. So there is a percentage where people have had to get involved and say, nope, the AI is wrong. But we make that completely open and available for people to do that. So within the product itself, they can see what the AI is thinking. We don't make it a black box for them. They can see, okay, AI has got this wrong and I can see why it's got it wrong. So we show people what the AI is thinking. We try to engender a sense of trust, but make it very customizable so that they're making the decisions. And that's, I think, a really important part because we want to empower our clients to understand the impacts of their decisions.
I didn't ask that to push you in a corner. It was just, I'm working for a 222 years old piping company. And we introduced, I think, a bit less than a decade ago, a non-destructive testing of pipe welds service. And our first customer, our value proposition for that was to say, we inspect the welds and we're going to assess, and we might sometimes find defects, but we're going to tell you those defects are fully fine, are within the design parameters, hence keep the weld, don't cut it out. And we still think is the full added value of the service, which is to say you don't simply see a defect and cut out. Instead of what, you do the maths, and if the maths add up that you still have sufficient strength in the weld, you would not touch the weld. But that customer told us, yeah, all nice. I read your story, I listened to your marketing, I read the brochure, I saw the video, whatever you want. But if you find a defect, whatever it is, cut it out. Defeating the point. But it's a matter of trust. And I'm thinking, if we come as a 2 centuries old company and we give an assessment, we give a guarantee, and still the customer wants us to cut out just to say, yeah, machine can calculate stuff, but I'm running my plant. We did like that for 10 years or for 20 years or for 40 years, which you probably hear pretty often. I'm thinking as a young startup coming out fresh in the field and you're saying, hey, we detected all of those, but it's fine. It's not that straightforward that they trust you from the get-go.
Yes, you're right. As far as their risk assessment, we basically say to them, these are all the things that we found. And then we also go back to them and say, okay, what's your thoughts on cracking? Or what's your thoughts on root intrusion? Do you want zero root intrusion, in which case you got to dig up every pipe? Or are you saying to us, actually 10% of root intrusion of the cross-sectional area of the pipe, I'm okay with that because I inspect frequently or I've got a root trimming program already online. That calibrates down the investment that's needed. So it's a really, we totally involve the client to make sure that they're making the decisions. But you're right. Some clients just have a blanket zero defect policy, which is very challenging if you're dealing with taxpayer dollars. But nonetheless, some people have the money.
So for all your potential customers who might be listening to us, let's take one of your projects from A to Z, where you're going to tell me who's your ideal customer, how do they look like, and if one of your ideal customers happens to really be your customer, let's pick that story. I know you have stories from Australia, from New Zealand, from UK, even one from the US. So I'll let you pick the one which you think would be the most accurate to describe your process, how you initiate the conversation with them, what happens, what do you deliver, and when does it end, if it ends. So what story do we tell? What case study do you want to pick?
Yes. Yeah. So it was actually a recent case study that we delivered at the Swan conference in Vancouver a couple of months ago. So we delivered a case study with Northumbrian Water. They're a water utility in the UK, albeit the UK is a very unique market, but the use case that Northumbrian Water used us for isn't. So they run a reactive CCTV program. And what that means is basically the customer calls up and tells them that something's gone wrong before they put a camera in the pipe, as opposed to proactive where they're putting a camera in the pipe before the customer calls up. They don't want to do that, but they're forced to because there's a lot on their network that they've got to manage. And so they came to us actually via another customer referrals. It was another customer, United Utilities, that was advocating the use of us, and Northumbrian found out about us through them. They actually did a trial where they pitted us against another AI company and selected us because of various parameters: AI accuracy, product ease, things like that, customer service. What we did for Northumbrian Water is we took all of their reactive CCTV inspection footage, and people uploaded the footage directly from site. So there was no coding on site. They uploaded the footage directly to our platform. The AI did all of the coding. And then the people in the back office at Northumbrian, the technical specialists, they came in and said, based on the defects identified and the recommendation that we had applied, they decide, do they agree with the recommendation or do they not? And so it turned this process that is very subjective into a very streamlined process. But the other thing that it did that really helped Northumbrian Water was aligned asset health with investment. So the crucial thing there is when you're putting a camera in a pipe to fix a blockage or something like that, the asset management principles of the organization may not be front of mind of the person that's going and popping that blockage. And so to be able to get data to match up to say, okay, this blockage is because there's a joint displacement. And so I need to fix that joint displacement so I don't come back here again, be identified in the back office. And that process is then eliminated so they don't go back again.
Lots of stuff to deconstruct here. So let me take them one by one. First, if I get you right, that means with Northumbrian, what you did was automation level 3. So you're coding the footage and giving a recommendation as to what should happen. And then someone manually steps in and reviews that. I don't know if it's 100% of them or if they were sampling some of them, and then says that I agree with the recommendation, that I don't agree with the recommendation. So is that your streamlined way of working, or was it a way to build the confidence with North? And now they would simply trust you because they found out that they would agree with the recommendation 99% of the time?
No, so that's the way that we work with all clients. So even though we strongly advocate the use of AI, the way that we talk about our tool is it's like an assistant, to borrow the Microsoft term of Copilot. It's like an assistant. It's an extension of your team. It's like a grad or an intern in your team. So you let them help you, or certainly they can be helpful, but you wouldn't leave them unsupervised. So all the footage has a recommendation against it, but all the footage does need to have someone to go through and say yes, no, yes, no. And that's the thing. It's exception handling. It's not the detailed analysis. And so that's the offset here, is to say, okay, you don't have to do the detailed analysis, but you do have to do the exception handling, which is much quicker.
But do you have like a statistics of how often the human would disagree with the AI?
10% of the time, there's a difference of opinion.
In the long run, would you envision a future where that validation step from the human falls out?
I think we've definitely toyed with the idea, but what I expect, at the very least, is that level of human intervention to go down, because we know that the volumes of inspection footage is going to go up. I don't want to be enabling people to just sit there and do exception handling their whole time, but to remove humans from the process altogether, I think would be a mistake. I think for the base needs of skill preservation, but I think there's also just, we don't want to be removing humans from a process. And I think there's a strong case for enablement, but not replacement.
Are you saying that because you believe in it, or are you saying that because you don't want to be too scary with your AI stuff?
No, I genuinely believe it. Like, so even if you look at my personal use case, and this is a lot of the reason of my personal why behind VAPAR, I was watching footage 8 hours a day as my job. And it wasn't the watching the footage that was exciting, and certainly nothing about watching footage is exciting. But the more complex stuff is like, what do I need to do about it? Do I need to do it now? How much is it going to cost me? How can I dovetail this with maybe roadworks that are also planned? So there's a huge amount of complexity that goes into the decision making that engineers and technical people do need to be involved in. And it's not a straightforward set and forget that you can just leave to. So yeah, it's about removing the mundane stuff and, kind of helping get to the more complex stuff that people do need to be involved in.
You said you expect to see more of that inspection to happen in the future and more of it to be checked. What is the bottleneck today? Like, could you be having robots like the Mars robots just wandering the sewers day in, day out? And the reason why we don't do that is that today it needs humans to watch it. And if they don't watch it, you're just capturing data for nothing, in which case you're somewhat removing the bottleneck because you're simplifying the inclusion of humans. Or is it still prohibitively expensive to run those robots in the sewer, in which case it might grow as a practice to inspect more, but not spectacularly? So which end would we be?
It's on the latter. So it is prohibitively expensive to inspect your entire network. And even though that's the start of the value chain, we'll get more and more footage as there's more and more footage collected. The value proposition of what we provide is more the data insights that comes from the aftermath. And so even though there's mediocre growth in how much inspection footage is captured every year, we're just chasing our tails on that number. We're going backwards. There's billions of dollars that are being spent every year, and that's not even close to what needs to be spent. So the investment side of things is going up and needs to go up further.
There's a book which is difficult to read, not the 0 to 1, like very good recommendation you gave us. It's really, you have to be a water nerd to find any interested in, but it's full of wisdom, stats and stuff like that, which is called Global Water Funding, which is a book by David Lloyd Owen. And I had David on that microphone some seasons ago to discuss the book. But his conclusion is to say that we have to do more with less, just because the infrastructure investments are not going up to the magnitude it should if you want to keep just the networks in the status quo they are today, not even thinking of making them better. So we have to be much more cautious about the investments and the way we place them so that we make them more efficient, which makes me think that exactly what you said, when you avoid replacing a line which doesn't have to be replaced, and when you strategically pick the one which has to be replaced at the right time and for the right reasons, well, you're doing exactly that. You're doing more with less or same budgets. You mentioned this 3 to 8 times lever aspect between the cost itself of the inspection and what it really delivers in terms of infrastructure management. First, let's get that one right. What are we exactly discussing here in terms of infrastructure planning? Can you qualify those 3 to 8 and then we'll go into your scope?
Yeah. So let's take Australia, for example. It can cost anywhere between $5 to $10 a metre to put a camera in a pipe. But then it can cost between $250 to $1,000 a metre to do any sort of rehabilitation on that pipe based on the inspection footage that was captured. And that's only if something needs to be done. So obviously not all the time. It's not a 1-to-1 ratio of inspection to rehab. But if something does need to be done, it's very expensive to do it. Whether it's trenchless or whether you have to dig the trench, very expensive to do the work. So that's where the decision making is super important, to make sure that you're only spending that money on things that are high risk and de-escalating even assets that you are promoting to rehab and saying, actually, maybe I don't need to do that this financial year, but I have budget potentially later on.
So $5 to $10 per meter to inspect, $250 to $300 per meter to rehab if needed. Out of these places where you expect to see trouble, what's the rough rule of thumb percentage of pipes where you'd say you need to do something in the coming 5 years?
Yeah, so we find about 10% of the inspected network requires some sort of rehabilitation or follow-on work. And that can vary. Like you say, sometimes there's a program that's actively targeting an area where they know that there's issues, and some of it's proactive. So it can go up and down from that.
But if I do quick maths and I do the calculation of the mathematic experience here, if I take the upper end of the inspection, so $10, and 10% of the time, it's going to need replacement, which means it would cost me $100 to inspect in order to find a defect which needs to be replaced. Replacing costs me, if now I take the lower end of that range, $250 per meter. So even if I'm in the absolute worst conditions and all the factors down, it still has a 2.5x factor, which makes it worth it to inspect every single time before I take any rehabilitation decision. So that sounds like pure evidence. Is it that straightforward? Like you would always inspect and assess before you go to works, or would sometimes people just say, you know what? I know my network and I can listen to it and I know I need to dig here.
No, they definitely put a camera into the pipe. And so there's oftentimes a delay between that first inspection that identifies a defect that does need a rehabilitation of up to 6 months. And so the contractor that gets awarded the rehabilitation will sometimes say, well, hang on, this footage is 6 months old. I don't know what I'm going to get myself into here. I might lose a camera down. So I'm going to put a camera in again. Then they'll do the rehabilitation itself, and then they'll put the camera in again to show evidence to the water authority. Yep, I've done this. And so therefore you can pay me now. So there's lots of footage getting captured.
So drum roll, we're 45 minutes in and we need to answer that question. Where do you make your money?
It's mainly from the decision support. So being able to say to people that, we go to councils and municipalities and they say, look, I've only got 200,000 this financial year, but they've got a $2 million backlog. And so what do I do? How do I spend the money best? And so we're able to reverse engineer a lot of the asset health information about their network that they've already inspected, or sometimes that they've inspected now, and say, well, in priority order, this is what are the highest risk assets. And if you tell us you care about cracks, then all of them become high risk. But if you tell us you actually care about fractures and maybe only the breaks or infiltration, then we can start to whittle it down to a more manageable number. That means that you can go to your council, get sign off, you can get it out to contract really quickly, and start to whittle down that infrastructure backlog instead of accelerating it further by spending the money in the wrong way.
I get the value you're bringing, but how do you collect your fair share of that value? What's your business model?
We work on a per meter or per foot basis. So every meter that's processed or every foot that's processed of inspection footage that goes through our platform, we have a rate associated with that. So it's basically to say that at a certain tier level, so let's, for argument's sake, 1,000 or 10,000 meters, there's a certain rate associated. And if you go above, then the rate drops. So the more that you use, the kind of cheaper it gets. And so we bias for volume and make sure that we're aligning value with delivery.
So you're solely paid on the amount of footage which you assess. If they save billions, thanks to you, you don't take a cut.
Correct. We're looking at pricing. This is the challenge with the value metric. And it is genuinely, so not just us, but I think it's not pricing is never an easy thing to nail down, but our current value metric is per meter of inspection footage processed. We're looking at, different ways of identifying that because, some organizations increase or decrease their inspection footage year on year. And we know that they know and we know that we're delivering value. So how do we look at that differently? So it's a constant food for thought.
So now I need to take my hat of being the bad guy. What would be the number one objection? Like, you go in and they tell you not interested because of that. What's that one? And then I have a second one.
Actually, something that you brought up earlier, which is I don't want the granularity from my network. Like, I'm happy with what I've got. I'm happy with the level of data that I've got. I don't struggle with meeting budget and the asset health information that I'm getting from my current provider. So in that case, then the value proposition degrades.
I think that's the saddest time I was right. So that means that they would not go for it just because they prefer being blind and playing it like the ostrich and having the head in the ground.
In markets where the asset management policy is quite strong and there's been consistent over time prudent spending on high risk assets and their backlog is small and they've got a good proactive program, they don't need as much of a solution like VAPAR yet. We're expanding our offering, but our ICP, our ideal customer profile, is very much those organizations that are woefully underfunded and really require a data solution to help create a pathway up to reducing that infrastructure backlog for them.
So that means public utilities, because those would be a slightly more underfunded, with the exception, of course, of the UK kind of weird animal, which is a bit special. So your ideal customer profile would be those public utilities, but you would not go to, I guess, Denmark or Singapore, where they are rightfully funded. So why would they need to optimize?
Most of our work comes out of the UK because there's a very weird scenario of privatization in that industry. But the fact remains, the level of funding does not meet the requirement of the network. So that's true very much in the UK because of the combined sewer system. It exists also very strongly in the US. So we're seeing a lot of exciting things come out of the US. Where we've got, say, in Australia, we've got a separated system. So the sewer pipes and the stormwater pipes are completely different. They're not the same pipe. There's not as stark a difference between how much funding people have and the infrastructure backlogs.
You didn't deliver to Paris, for instance, because we are recording the third day of the Olympics, and who saw the opening ceremony knows that there was a heavy rain on Paris, which means that now all the open water sports are in trouble because, as many billions that they poured into the network, I guess they haven't inspected the right pipes at the right place. And it is a combined sewer, and now it's not meeting quality. But would those be also like there's a big event, LA is coming up in 4 years, maybe they want to be better prepared than Paris. Would that be a use case for you where there's high stakes, or really it's about infrastructure management?
So there's a number of drivers, such as the Olympics. Even when the Olympics were in Sydney, a lot of drivers enhance the amount of investment that goes into the pipe network. Sydney built a 14-kilometre tunnel storage situation interceptor that basically stopped any of the sewage go out into Sydney Harbour for the games. So, probably something similar that Paris has invested in. There is a very cool, I don't know if you've been to it, there's a very cool sewer museum right next to the Eiffel Tower. You should definitely hit it up. I'm sure Paris has done something similar as well. Those drivers are also very helpful, but the big tailwind that you cannot ignore is the depreciation of our assets, the requirement, the infrastructure backlogs just globally going up. That's more of a slow burn driver for us that is definitely going to help us with adoption.
Totally off topic. I'm sorry about that. Do you still have in Sydney that 4-kilometer pipe which goes into the ocean because it was faster to build than upgrading the wastewater treatment plant, which they did for the Olympics, because that way you could have all the sports going on the coast?
I wouldn't be surprised if it was still there. There's so many solutions that need to be employed last minute to take care of these problems, rather. But whether they're long term is the question.
Okay, sorry for the sidetrack. Bring you back on track. You mentioned how the UK is one of your main markets. Is it a challenge as an Australian company based out of Sydney? I know that you have also an office in the UK, but time zones are against you. Is that troublesome, or for an AI startup, come on, everything can be remote?
Unfortunately, we haven't figured out how to make AI align time zones. So yes, it is a very big challenge. In any organization, people are the biggest asset in an organization. And so it does create a unique kind of scenario. And I think people have to be very good at communication because, like you say, 9 hours is the best case. Actually, in winter, it's 11 between the east coast of Australia and the UK. We just got our first team member in the US. So it's 24 hours, which is fun. And again, just like elongates those communication timelines between the team.
You mentioned the US. On your website, there's this thing which says US, one reference, more to come. So is it like your next El Dorado? After all, it's much larger than the UK, and arguably they have at least the same kind of trouble. But how challenging is it for you? I mean, what I'm trying to understand here is that you just raised $5 million Australian dollars from investors led by Pure Terra Ventures. And I'm just out of my little brain thinking that after all, that's not so much money. So if you want to take on different geographies, the entire world, can you do that with that amount of money? Or do you need to focus and say, you know what, the US is it? And when I say the US, it's those 4 states on the East Coast. And let's start there. Let's build our beachhead.
The latter part of what you just said is pretty much the strategy, is to make sure that we're able to cement ourselves, to get ourselves into the US, and then make sure that we've got, at least 5 to 10 really happy customers to start with. Get ourselves to a milestone as well. So generally, when startups fundraise, you're raising to a milestone. You're raising generally 24 months as a rule of thumb of runway. And there's many schools of thought on this, whether you raise as much as you can or raise as little as you need. And we're raising for a milestone, we're raising for that 2-year runway to make sure that we're in the US, we've got really good customers, we've got good traction, but also that we're also in the UK. That's our biggest market. that regulatory period that, is just about to begin, we've got to make sure that we've cemented our position in the UK. It's very exciting. There's a lot of innovation happening there. So yeah, the 5 mil is going to be pushed.
So your philosophy is to raise as little as you need.
Well, we raise as much as we need because I think that's what any startup would be doing, just to make sure that you don't want to over dilute, but you also want to make sure that you're not stifling the company just because you want to protect your position.
In your UK story, you said you were facing that other AI company. And when I was doing my research, I found out that nowadays every specialist water venture fund has its own jewel in the crown in terms of AI assessment of sewer and stormwater lines. And so for Pure Ventures, it's going to be you. But I think Burnton Ventures is invested in sewer AI. And I can't remember who's the one invested in fluid robotics. But I'm just wondering, being several different companies in that field, I would see that as a positive because that means there's a market. And it's much easier, with a lot of brackets around the easier, to build a market if you're not alone. On the other end, Sewer AI is a US company backed by US investors. So there, if you go to the US, you're going to fight the locals, and it can be tricky.
Yeah, definitely. It's very encouraging for us to see the traction that US Sewer AI are having, fluid robotics as well. It gives us a lot of really positive market signals in the US and tells us a little bit of a story about the success that we might enjoy. And that's what we're bidding for, right? And so, yeah, the challenge, there's definitely a challenge, but yeah, we're hoping to rise to it.
Do you talk together? Like there would be a big villain, which is traditional approaches, and you would be all fighting that big villain together? Or is it like pure competition, or you don't even that much even notice yourself because the water industry is so scattered that you can really be living in parallel without ever crossing?
The US is so big, right? There's so many water utilities and municipalities. In one state alone, you could have thousands, and there's like little pockets of people that know each other and things like that. So yeah, it's a very big place. There's lots to be done there, and each organization is coming at it from a completely different angle, albeit, very similar technology. So we're all using AI, but as an example, fluid robotics has a hardware component to what they do. Sewer AI they don't do the hardware themselves, but, they interact with the hardware certainly more than we do. And for that reason, their customer and their ICP is slightly different to us. The problem that they're solving is slightly different, albeit the technology is very similar. The problem that they're solving and the ICP can be slightly different in some cases.
So coming back to your own fundraise, I mean, there are several venture players and Pure is the lead investor, but there's one which is not a venture, which is Autodesk. So you have Autodesk on your cap table. What does that tell us?
Yeah, we are absolutely stoked to have Autodesk on our cap table. Autodesk over the last couple of years are heavily investing in water, and we're absolutely thrilled. So they canvassed the market in the AI kind of pipe space and selected VAPAR from the vendor that they wanted to proceed with in terms of just partnering. And then, it started there, and then we had this raise coming up, and so they kind of put their hand up and said they were interested to learn more. So we're super excited to have Autodesk. They're doing a lot of investment in water, and for us, a global brand, the customer footprint that they have in North America, we're bidding for market share for huge amounts of distribution help and sales assistance that we can enjoy now because we have this partnership with Autodesk.
Autodesk somewhat created the first ever water unicorn. Autodesk acquired Innovyze for $1 billion. So my thinking process is when they agreed on the valorization, Innovyze became a unicorn. And then when Autodesk acquired Innovyze, then they were not a unicorn anymore because they were acquired. But just to say, they are ready to go big or they seem to be ready to go big on water topics. So is that what you aim to be building, or is it like totally unrealistic to say that a CCTV AI inspection tool can become a unicorn?
So if we were to stay in exactly what we're doing now, I think that would be a very big challenge to make that claim. But yeah, no, our ambition is much, much higher than just doing pipes. So yeah, very excited to own in this pipe space.
So what are you building in the next 5 or 10 years?
Our whole kind of company and product vision is actually about public assets. So when we think about the customer and the ICP, the ideal customer that we're trying to serve, it is the asset owner. So people that are trying to maintain these public assets with taxpayers' money that just, are chasing their tails because the investment is potentially going to the wrong areas or they don't have enough. And so the problem that we solve now and are speaking about is related to civil pipes and drainage pipes. But there's a lot more asset classes than just those two that this problem relates to. In the next couple of years, we'll be looking at translating what our workflow is and the models from more than just sewer pipes, more than just drainage pipes to adjacent ancillary assets, and how we can grow that from there. So it is going to be, that in and of itself is a very crowded space. So we have no illusions that's going to be an easy one, but such is the challenge of the role.
That's the vision. And as I'm already going far too long, and I'm sorry about that, I won't use that open door you're giving me, but I'm going to mark that for the future because that's a red ocean. Those platformization and being like the O of the water utility. I think that would make for a great sequel conversation. So I'll put that one in the fridge. But I still have one question, which is that's your vision. Now, if you translate it into your action plan for the next 6 or 12 months, what needs to happen?
Yeah, so what we're doing now for water utilities is saying what's gone wrong in your pipe. We're using AI to deep learning over the inspection footage directly to say, here's all the defects here and here. And then we use another bit of software to say, okay, this is what, based on what you're telling us, this is what you need to do about it. We're also helping people understand when they need to do something about it. So overlaying contextual information, whether it's geospatial or risk, and then cost. So when do I need to do something and how much is it going to cost me? Those two moments are handled kind of quasi on platform. And so what we're trying to do is complete that workflow to say you're able to come to a decision completely within our product on these 4 fundamental questions that help you fix an asset before it fails or fix a pipe before it fails. And once we're able to do that in a very seamless way, then, we'll look at expanding out to other asset classes.
I thought that would be the last question in the deep dive, but no, I need to ask. How do you get your insights on how your customers behave with the tool? Do you proactively go with them and look at what they do?
Yeah, well, so there's this theory for like product management, but just even products called jobs to be done. And it's about looking at, I don't know if there's an equivalent hardware store in France, but in Australia it's called Bunnings. And it's basically the analogy of somebody walks into this hardware store and even though they ask for a 1/4-inch drill, what they actually want is a hole in the wall. But then hang on a second, they don't actually want a hole in the wall. They want a painting there. If you're a Bunnings or a hardware company, I could sell them a drill. I could sell them a hook, like the 3M ones. So there's a bunch of solutions that could solve the problem if you understand the core reason as to what the job is that they're doing. And so we look at our customers and foster a relationship with our customers such that we really try and understand their jobs as well, or if not better than them, so that we make sure we've only got one product, one platform. And when we release something, it has to work for everyone. So we want to make sure that we understand the core reason why people are doing what they're doing and align it with everyone so that we can't make everyone happy, but that deep understanding of the customer drives how we build.
Well, again, that is another area where I would probably push further, but I think that's a sign we need to have a sequel. Thanks a lot, Amanda, for everything you shared in that deep dive. To round off those interviews, I have a set of rapid fire questions. If that's fine for you, I would switch to that. And in the meantime, about that jobs to be done story, there is an awesome episode of the Everyone Hates Marketers podcast on that very specific topic of jobs to be done. I'm going to link it in the show notes. And for now, the rapid fire questions start with...
It's time for the rapid fire questions.
What is the toughest challenge in your opinion for water tech startups?
Sales cycles.
What would be your best single piece of advice for the founders and managers of the about 1,000 early stage water startups?
Understand sales cycles.
What's the drop of knowledge you wish more investors knew about the water sector?
I think how sticky contracts can be and how once you build that trust with a customer, genuinely build that trust and relationship is a huge amount of long-term value.
So if I take a sidetrack, from the two first answers, I understand that the cost of acquisition is super high because of the long sales cycle and all of that, but the lifetime value is also super high, so it's worth the effort. Do I get you right?
Correct. But a lot of investors just see, 6-month sales cycle or like 12-month sales cycle, and they're just like, see ya.
What was your most unexpected partnership and what did it bring you?
Our most unexpected partnership was actually with a competitor who I won't name, but it was very early days. We explored and actually got quite far down the line of co-developing something together. it taught us a lot about that organization, but also about partnering. What are some of the gates that we should put in place for no-go or no-go for partnerships and things like that? It actually really helped us partner in the future, which was an unexpected consequence.
You got me curious, but you said you can't name them, so I'll respect that. Super short, profitability or growth?
Growth.
What is the next profile you'll hire?
US sales director.
When you hire, are you looking for sector experience or startup experience?
Sector over startup, like specialist over startup.
Opening new markets or doubling down on the current ones? And I think your previous answer tells us a lot about that.
Yeah. But yeah, opening new markets, I think, is the focus of the two, though both are very important for us.
What is that tool nobody speaks about, but you couldn't live without?
Google Tasks.
Oh, I got Google Drive, Google Calendar in that section, but never Google Tasks. So Google has a whole suite of things that people couldn't live without. Interesting.
And spreadsheets, really. Like, I feel like spreadsheets, just in general, that's also, I've got like very cool spreadsheets that I love.
Yeah. Makes you a little bit less of a cool kid just because you answered that. But yeah, sorry. What's the single piece of insight your ideal customer profile needs to hear right now?
They probably know the reality that not only, assets getting worse, but the other insight is we just don't have enough people in the industry to do this sort of work. We cannot train people to sit there and watch CCTV for 8 hours a day. And the people that are doing it now, to be blunt, have grey hair. And so there's this silver wave of people that are going to start retiring and take that really fundamental and important knowledge, hopefully not with them, but may do. So it's an inevitability. We've doubled our numbers on many accounts, but certainly usage year on year. I'm sure others in the space can say to similar numbers. People are really starting to look into this. There is a better way. And so definitely find out more if you think that you need some help.
What are you desperately needing and want to raise an open call for right now?
So very excited about getting our product into the US. I think there's a huge need for it. We've seen the uptake in the UK, which is a similar market. So yeah, very keen to hear from any municipalities or water authorities in the North American area. If you want to learn more about what we're doing, please VAPAR.co.
As always, those links will be in the show notes. Now, caveat that as well, the UK has 2 handfuls of water utilities. The US has 155,000, of which 50,000 must be wastewater utilities. So yeah, it's a scattered iceberg you'll have to take on. Last question, what can and should I do for you?
What can you do you've already done so much, Antoine. Even just having me on this podcast. Like I said, I've been a massive fangirl of your podcast and your content online. So definitely keen to stay a follower. But yeah, if there's anything else that I can help with or keep on delivering your content.
That is straightforward. I'm asking you if I can help you, and you're telling me keep doing what you're doing and I can help you. But that's a good deal. If all my conversations were that easy,
But generally, I think there's not enough of a conversation about water technology, startups, the funding, the issues in the space. And so really your content at least strikes a chord with me. And I'm sure that's the case with all of your other followers. So definitely keen for you to keep doing what you're doing.
Well, I really appreciate it. Amanda, it's been a pleasure to spend that bit more than expected time with you. If people want to follow up with you, what's the best place for me to redirect them to?
Yeah, so they can check us out on our website, www.vapar.co, or hit us up on LinkedIn as well.
Off track, which is absolutely stupid, but 1 hour, I can allow myself. I picked dww.show for my website, and then a lot of people are asking me, is it wrong? Because it should be www, and you say dww, so it must be wrong. You picked .co, which people would be thinking, you missed the M, right?
Yeah.
But yeah.
Oh man, it's the worst. So much domain sitting on vapor.com and I not bothered to pay them, so just sit there with CO.
So as always, the links are in the show notes, so check them out. Amanda, it's been a great pleasure. I stand my point. I would be super happy to have a follow-up with you the next time you hit a big milestone. For instance, when you get your traction going in the US, or whenever you feel like it's worth it to share the story, because we have still open doors from today. So I can imagine that if we feed that with more in the future, it's going to make for another cool conversation. So thanks a lot for that, and talk to you soon.
Thanks, Antoine.
Thanks for listening to Don't Waste Water. This podcast was brought to you by GF Piping Systems. Loved this episode? Head over to Apple Podcasts to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. See you next time.